The road to the house was long, narrow, and winding, one of those unpaved countryside lanes that made the tires hum and crunch in a steady rhythm. Out here, the world felt thinner. The air tasted sharper, the smells cleaner. The kind of clean that made the back of your neck prickle, like something was missing from it. No exhaust fumes, no street vendors frying food, no wet pavement baking under the sun. Just the faint scent of earth, pine, and something sweet that might have been blooming in the distance. He had left the city behind with a sigh so deep it felt like his lungs had been carrying concrete. Years of traffic, sirens, late-night shouting from drunken strangers, all gone now. This was his escape, his reprieve. The house came into view around a bend, a weathered two-story structure with white paint so old it had turned yellow in places, like bones left in the sun. Its roof sagged slightly toward the middle, but in the charming way that made it seem lived in rather than abandoned. He could see the tall, thick wooden walls even from the driveway, and he immediately thought, these will keep the cold out. These will keep the noise out. Inside, it smelled of dust and wood polish, faintly mixed with that old house aroma, like books that have been sitting unopened for decades. The floors groaned politely under his weight, as though acknowledging a new presence after years of silence. His footsteps echoed in the hallways, but not in an empty way. It was the echo of privacy, of a home that kept its sounds to itself. He set his boxes down in the bedroom upstairs. The bed he'd bought secondhand sat against the far wall, its headboard resting against thick planks that felt solid as stone when he knocked on them. He imagined himself lying there, wrapped in blankets, hearing nothing but the whisper of wind in the trees outside. It was almost too perfect. He felt a strange comfort in the idea that here, out in the middle of nowhere, there was no one else. No cars, no sirens, no neighbor's television leaking through thin walls. Just him and the quiet. But as he leaned against the headboard that first afternoon, letting the cool wood press against the back of his skull, he thought he felt a faint vibration pass through it. So slight he might have imagined it. And even if he hadn't imagined it, it was nothing. Just the house settling into the fact that it wasn't alone anymore. The sun dipped below the horizon earlier than he expected, swallowing the world outside in a deep, velvety darkness. The absence of streetlights was startling. No faint glow bleeding in through curtains, no distant car headlights painting shadows on the ceiling. Just pure night. He lit a single lamp by the bed, its amber light casting soft halos against the wooden walls, and lay back with a book he'd been meaning to finish for years. The silence wrapped around him like a blanket. He could hear the slow tick of the old clock in the hallway and the occasional sigh of the house as it adjusted to the cooling air. Somewhere far off, a night bird called once, twice, then fell silent. It was almost too quiet, so quiet that his own breathing seemed loud. Eventually, his eyelids began to droop. He set the book on the nightstand and let himself sink into the mattress, pulling the blanket over his shoulders. The wind outside picked up, brushing against the outer walls with a sound like a soft exhale. He thought he'd drift off instantly in this kind of peace. And then 3 faint knocks. They came from directly behind his headboard, so soft that for a moment he wasn't sure he'd actually heard them. 3, spaced evenly apart. Tap, tap, tap. He lay there, frozen, holding his breath. His mind scrambled for explanations, wood contracting in the cool air, an old pipe shifting, maybe even a loose board settling. He'd read somewhere that old houses like to talk at night. But this didn't sound like the random pops and creaks of wood. It sounded deliberate. He waited, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the lamplight. No more sounds came. Eventually, he exhaled slowly, forcing himself to relax. Just the house, he told himself. Just the house getting used to me. Still, it took a while before sleep found him. And even then, somewhere in the haze between waking and dreaming, he thought he heard another soft tap, almost as if it were checking to see if he was awake. The next morning was drenched in sunlight, golden beams spilling through the thin curtains and pooling on the wooden floor. Any unease from the night before seemed ridiculous in the brightness of day. He padded down the creaking stairs, brewed himself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window overlooking the stretch of meadow beyond the property. The knocks had been nothing. He decided that firmly as he watched the grass ripple in the breeze. The city had made him too jumpy, used to sirens, shouting, footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment door. Here, every sound felt magnified simply because there weren't hundreds of others to drown it out. He inspected the wall behind the bed out of curiosity, running his hand over the cool wood. No cracks, no signs of water damage. Solid. If there was anything inside, it was probably a mouse or two making their rounds. That would explain it. He even chuckled to himself at the thought. He'd moved all this way to escape the noise, only to be kept awake by a country mouse with impeccable rhythm. By the time night came again, the memory of the knocks had almost faded. He read a few chapters, yawned, and switched off the lamp. The darkness pressed in a little heavier than the night before. But he ignored it, confident that whatever he'd heard was nothing worth worrying about. This time, as he drifted toward sleep, there were no knocks. Just the whisper of wind outside and the distant creak of the staircase settling. Still, a part of him lay quietly waiting, ears tuned to the wall, wondering if the silence was the real anomaly. The second night lulled him into complacency at first. The wind outside was calmer, and the temperature had dropped just enough for him to burrow under the blankets without overheating. He fell into that half-dream state where thoughts tangle with images, where reality begins to blur into something softer. Then came the sound. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was louder, not thunderous, but strong enough that he felt it reverberate faintly through the wood against his skull. He sat up, pulse kicking against his ribs, and listened. The air in the room felt different now still, as though the house were holding its breath. Before he could decide what to do, the knocking came again. 3 sharp taps, and then a slow, dragging sound. It was the kind of sound that made his teeth ache, like fingernails pulled along the inside of the wall. It moved downward, faded, then stopped completely. He turned on the lamp and stared at the wooden planks, half expecting them to bulge or split. They didn't. The wall looked exactly the same. Just thick, painted boards with faint grooves where time had worn them smooth. He pressed his ear against the surface, holding it there until the cold seeped into his skin. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Eventually, he switched off the light again. But this time he slept facing the opposite direction, eyes fixed on the closed bedroom door. By the third night, he began to notice something unsettling, not just in the sounds, but in their timing. The knocks didn't come randomly. They arrived only after he'd been lying still for a long time, in that fragile moment just before true sleep. It was as if whatever was making them knew exactly when his body was loosening its grip on wakefulness. That night, he tried an experiment. He lay in bed earlier than usual, closed his eyes, and pretended to drift off. His breathing slowed, his body relaxed, but every nerve in him remained sharply alert. For nearly an hour, there was nothing. Then knock, knock, knock. His eyes snapped open, heart thudding. The sound was precise, intentional. He didn't move, just listened. After the knocks came the dragging again, slower this time, as if someone or something were drawing a fingertip across the inside of the wall. He pictured tiny creatures, mice maybe, their claws clicking. But deep down, the sound felt wrong for that. It wasn't scurrying, wasn't quick or nervous. It was measured, deliberate. He waited for it to stop before whispering into the darkness. "Hello!" Silence. He stayed awake the rest of the night, the lamp on, the book open but unread in his lap. He told himself it was just the house. But the way the sound waited until he was on the edge of sleep made him feel watched. The next morning, his curiosity overrode his unease. He decided to find the source of the noise. He started in the bedroom, knocking against the wall at different spots, listening for hollowness or vibration. Most of the wall was solid, but near the headboard, there was a faintly different tone, subtly more hollow. He crouched, running his fingers along the edges of the boards, looking for gaps. Finding nothing obvious, he went outside. The exterior wall behind his bedroom looked perfectly ordinary, weathered wood siding, a bit of moss at the bottom. But no holes or signs of nesting animals. He even pressed his ear to it. But all he heard was the wind moving through the trees. The isolation of the property hit him then. If there was something strange happening here, there was no one around to hear it but him. That afternoon, he tried distracting himself with chores, fixing a loose shutter, organizing the kitchen. But the wall kept calling to him in the back of his mind. That night was coming, and he wondered if the knocking would return, and if it did, whether it would be louder still. When the sound returned that night, it brought something new. He just rolled onto his side, facing the wall again despite his better judgment. When the familiar 3 knocks came, only this time they were followed not by dragging, but by a faint whisper. It was so soft he almost dismissed it as the wind through the boards, until he realized the syllables had shape. They weren't random noise. They were words. So cold. He jerked upright, every muscle taut. The whisper had been thin, weak, as though spoken from far away, as it had been right there on the other side of the wall. He sat frozen for what felt like hours, waiting for it to return. Eventually, it did. "Don't leave." The voice sounded lonely, not menacing, but that somehow made it worse. He didn't sleep at all that night. By the next day, he'd made a decision. He wasn't going to sleep in that room again. He moved his bedding to the living room sofa, telling himself it was temporary, just until the noises stopped. That night, lying in the dim glow of the fireplace, he almost relaxed. No wall behind his head, no hollow space for whispers to seep through. But just as he was dozing off, he heard the faintest knock. This time, from the floor beneath the sofa. 3 taps. Then the dragging. He sat up instantly, pulse racing, and stared at the floorboards. Whatever it was, it could move. Sleep became a negotiation. No matter where he lay, bedroom, sofa, even once on a rug in the hallway, the knocks would eventually find him. Always 3. Always followed by dragging. Sometimes the whispers came with it, sometimes not. The worst was when the knocking seemed to follow him in real time. He'd shift a pillow, roll to one side, and moments later the sound would adjust its location too, keeping itself right behind his head. And if it were tracking his position, the voice returned that night, clearer than before. "Please stay." So dark. The loneliness in it was suffocating. And for the first time, he wondered if ignoring it might be making it worse. The next night, he decided to answer. When the knocks came, he whispered back, "Who are you?" Silence. He tried again. "What do you want?" This time, the reply came after a pause. "You." His skin went cold. The dragging began again, slow and deliberate, like fingertips drawing closer through the wood. He stayed absolutely still until dawn. In daylight, he went to the nearest town, half an hour away, to look for records about the house. The librarian, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, seemed hesitant to help at first. When he gave the address, she frowned. "That's the old Marlowe place, isn't it?" She brought out a small stack of yellowed newspapers. He read about a family who had lived there decades ago, a husband, wife, and young daughter. The wife had fallen ill, bedridden for months. The husband claimed she died quietly in her sleep. But neighbors had reported strange noises from the house in the weeks before she passed. Tapping, dragging, whispering. No one could explain it. He closed the papers slowly. The details were too familiar. By the 7th night, exhaustion made him reckless. When the knocks came, he didn't freeze. He pressed his hand flat against the wall and said, "I'm here." There was a long pause. Then a hand pressed back. The wood between them seemed to breathe, the faintest pulse of warmth seeping through. The dragging sound was gone, replaced by slow, rhythmic tapping, almost like a heartbeat. He pulled his hand away, trembling. The voice came more often now, not just at night but in the still moments of the day. "Stay. I'll keep you warm." never alone. There was no menace in it, only a terrible aching need. He found himself thinking about it constantly. If something so lonely had been trapped there for decades, maybe talking to it wasn't so bad. But then came the other whisper, sharper this time. If you leave, I'll follow. He decided it had to end. He packed a bag, waiting for dawn so he could leave. But in the middle of the night, the knocks began again. Faster this time, urgent. The dragging was frantic, as though clawing toward him. The voice rose into a low, desperate wail. Don't leave, please. The wall seemed to vibrate under the sound. His lamp flickered. Somewhere deep inside the wood, something shifted, something heavy, moving closer. The final sound was not a knock. It was a crack, the wood splitting right behind his head. A cold rush of air spilled through the gap, carrying with it a smell of damp earth and something faintly metallic. He didn't wait to see what would emerge. He grabbed his bag, bolted down the stairs, and didn't look back as he drove away into the night. But as he reached the end of the dirt road, he thought he heard it again. 3 soft knocks from somewhere inside the car.